It's been nice to have this time to reflect on the Tranquille site and the rich history of that site. If you look at websites about sort of the most haunted places in Canada, of course Tranquille often will appear on those websites. It was often referred to as consumption at the time. Certainly right around the time when the sanatorium was established, it was quite bad in Canada and certainly far beyond Canada. And kind of a sort of a feared disease. And I know even from later into the 50s and 60s, it was still a feared disease and a disease that caused people to be isolated. The impression I get about the mental health institution at the Tranquille site is that the relationship with the city was fairly good, and that perceptions were, fairly positive. In some ways interesting that they didn't just sort of maybe destroy it and move, sort of start fresh and move on and that kind of thing. In the 1980s in British Columbia, there was a move towards deinstitutionalization, so moving mental health patients out of institutions and back with their families or in sort of smaller care homes and things like that. And actually, when that did happen, there was quite an uproar actually in Kamloops at the site. There was a number of workers who lived there, and there was families who protested, and so on. So the whole issue of deinstitutionalization is sort of, and was, I guess, at the time, kind of quite controversial.
My involvement with Tranquille community. So back in 1993, I came out of training and I was posted to Kamloops. And my first assignment was working on the north shore of Kamloops. And we would occasionally have to go out to Tranquille Creek. We would call it Padova City. So this was a lot of the housing that we would go to for calls that was being used, I think, previously by staff. This area in here is the old school, and this field in here is where some of the cattle were being grazed. If I recall correctly, they tried to restrict access back up in here to prevent people from coming down there, and the facility itself was more along here, which, as you can see, right, is along Kamloops Lake, and Cooney Bay is still an area where a lot of people access. It is quite a ways on the outskirts of Kamloops, so obviously not something close enough that people will walk to, but definitely drive to. Back then in the mid-90s, it was actually an abandoned facility. And I can't remember exactly why, but they restricted access to most of the buildings there. I think it had to do with the fact that it had changed hands, it was privately owned, and there was concerns about asbestos And there was also concerns about the integrity of the buildings. Some of the calls we would go to were as nuisance youth and people actually going onto the grounds of the facility, maybe as a dare and maybe as something that they thought would be exciting, because old facilities, especially mental health hospitals, bring with it a connotation of scariness and something that they could be on the spooky side.
We're back at the abandoned sanatorium. This is where we heard the woman humming last night. Did you hear that? Is there anyone in here with us?
Some people have dubbed Tranquille as one of the most haunted locations in Canada. People have experienced orbs caught in photos, loud footsteps, feelings of being followed.
What I think is, I hope that we can balance those sort of ideas about Tranquille, that focus on the spookiness of the site and so on, with an understanding of the richer history of the site, that the site does have this rich, complicated history of human experience that spans the range, right? From worker histories and family histories and illness, but also happiness. I think we need to be careful not to risk trivializing the rich history of the site. So the extent to which we as Kamloopsians, as historians, as heritage advocates can sort of push for a deeper understanding of the history of the site and for remembering that history, I think that's to all of our benefits.